So this is not nice to have. This is must have. And I encourage the students on the call as you're going through interviews, ask these employers what their practices are around mental health. Number one question on campus last year was why my mental health benefit was a little different than the competitors, right? You guys care about this. So keep asking questions around that versus, what's your top 10 clients, right? That's not going to do anything to your career and keeping you healthy, right? So you guys are a voice of change. As much as some days you think you carry still maybe a lot of self-imposed stigma, I see every day that you're way above the norm. Like the 50 plus have a lot of stigma. No, not my daughter, not my son. But you guys, you get this, right? There's still a few self-imposed mind blocks, but more and more you're becoming a voice to making me redundant. So thank you for what you do.
I definitely think it is generational because even growing up through the social media age, I have noticed the amount of talk that goes on about mental health awareness and mental health resources is much more prominent than when my parents were growing up, for example, or my grandparents even. So I think times have been changing and things should only get better from here, especially when companies do have roles like the chief mental health officer who work towards ending those stigmas and making sure that everyone has the resources they need. So off of that then, we kind of talked about this already and alluded to it, but do you believe that there still is currently a stigma around mental health in the corporate world specifically? And do you think that there is a way that companies can break these stigmas?
I think the simple answer is yes, there's still some imposed stigma. Is it because of corporate world or is it because of society? I mean, I think it's more society than corporate, right? I don't think it's because you're in sector XYZ that there's more stigma than somewhere else. I think it's more just stigma that it's self-imposed, right? Like this is telling you that you're no good and that Gabrielle will judge Denis if I open up, but it's not, right? So once you change your mindset and realize that this is no different than any other illness. That's the challenge, right? I wish I had a ski accident, Gabrielle, because it's easy. You come to visit Denis. Hey, Denis, that was a hell of a wipeout. When does your physio start? It's going to be X weeks. But when it comes to mental health, depending how you are, you're kind of, oh, well, does Denis really want to see me at the hospital or not? Like, I know him, he's a colleague, but I don't, right? And it's easy to just move on. So, I think sessions like this at school, corporately, and it's bringing change. Like all the listeners, when you start your career, many of you probably have because you're corporate. Don't don't underestimate the power that you have to bring change. Imagine this, Gabrielle, at your employer, you go to your performance counselor and you say, I'd like to host a fireside chat on mental health. Pretty hard for your boss to say no, right? Your boss probably going to say, well, that's interesting, Gabrielle. What do you have in mind? Well, I happen to know blah, 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 chief mental health officer, or my neighbor's a psychologist, and I'll bring them in. Just the act of putting that in your team on the agenda is bringing change. And that's what I see in my lens, Gabby. And COVID has accelerated this exponentially because in this space, you have some people who are on the bus and you have some who are hanging by the windows. Well, the ones hanging by the windows now are on the bus because, I love the Quebec ad. You were there when your aging parents got moved to a home and there was a COVID outbreak. You were there when your partner lost her job. You were there for kids homeschooling. And then it's you looking in the mirror saying, it's okay not to be okay. So COVID has done that to many of us, and the ones who didn't have any tools in their toolbox are probably hitting that wall faster than Gabrielle, who has great tools in her toolbox, who may still hit a wall but may bounce back because she's got a few things to draw on, right? So it was changing pre-COVID to the point where inclusion and diversity language has become language, right? We don't it's there. It's embedded. Mental health in my lens it's on the wave to. Why are we talking about this? We all get it, right? It's going to be core. It's going to be on the agenda. Like you see a lot of teams now and groups who who talk about this in every meeting. How's our team doing? Who's running too hot? Gabrielle's running too hot. Let's put the cooling suit on her. Right? So it's not a system. It's not something you buy. It's culture, right? It's the DNA that all the students listening today are bringing to their new employers.
Yeah, so really fostering that language and turning the
Yeah,
lens of how we're talking about mental
you
health.
got it. You got it.
All right, that's awesome. Honestly, I find too, even just checking up on friends by just saying, "How are you doing?" It's a great way to kind of smooth and easily just ask about their mental health without implying anything and making it a safe space for them to talk about. So I really like that and to bring that into the corporate lens as well.
I love the acronym ALAC. It is Movember, right? And Movember was normally, grow more awareness for men's prostate. Now they've retooled to mental health for men. Interesting, isn't it, right? But I can say from the corporate lens that 68% about internally, where I am, are female who participate. So that kind of tells you something, right? And it kind of supports why Movember is kind of like trying to get the men to open up and get help and so on. But I love their acronym called ALEC because oftentimes we don't know what our role is. Like, i.e., if Gabrielle was suffering, your friends are saying, are asking you, Gabrielle, what can I do for you? So this acronym might be helpful. The A is ask. So I call Gabrielle and I say, Gabrielle, how are you? And 71% of the people, this is proven in studies, will say, I'm fine. That's where I should say, oh, really, Gabrielle? Like, aren't you in midterms? You're all remote. You're all Zoom. Don't be afraid to show vulnerability that you care. And then all of a sudden that generates a different discussion, right? The L in ALEC is my role or your friend's role is to listen to you non-judgmentally. Parents suck at that. Parents really suck at that, right? Because they're used to fixing things. So the L, if you're supporting a friend, is not to be a doctor, not to solve it, not to say things like, oh, I'll take the weekend off, you have nothing to worry about. That's offensive, right? As if Gabrielle's hitting a tough time, as if you haven't tried taking the weekend off and not worrying about things, right? So listen non-judgmentally. The E is encourage them to access resources. So that's why today we're going to talk about resources. You're supporting a friend at school. You have amazing resources at school. Encourage them to use it. Don't just tell them to use it. Search out the resources for them, right? If you're on the floor bleeding, I'm not going to go, oh, Gabrielle, go get the first aid kit. Take care of yourself, right? I'm going to go get it. So the C is check in again. Hey, Gabrielle, thanks for reaching out to me. And you know what? Let me check in on you again tomorrow. So I love that acronym because it's so easy, right? It's easy to remember. Ask, listen, encourage the use of resources, and check in. There's a new tool for
Sure.
everybody in your toolbox.
I will
Go to
definitely
the
add that.
November site. They've got all kinds of info on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it very casually, but still show that you care and not put any pressure on anyone to say anything that they wouldn't want to share with you.
Yeah, you got it. It's a listening, non-judgmentally role, which is hard to do, right? I'm sure there's a lot of listeners listening go, oh my God, I told my best friend, don't do this, don't do that. But that's coming from a big heart. But once we move our individual dial on education, we learn, right?
Exactly. It's all about learning and awareness. So off of that too, then, what do you think is the importance of ensuring that you are mentally healthy when you go to work and bringing your mentally healthy self to work?
To be top of your game if you're not mentally healthy, right? There's studies I've learned from doctors, the concept of presenteeism. It's a factor of 7.5. I've been told that means if Gabrielle is off work for a month, upwards to 7.5 months already, you haven't been top of your game. And that hits you, right? Because when you think of when you've gone through difficult times or you supported a friend who has, this is not something that happened overnight usually, right? Unless it's situational. There's that buildup where you've seen your best friend go downhill a bit and downhill a bit and downhill a bit, right? So hence the sooner that your friend and via your support, you can get that person to access resources, the quicker they rebound, right? I always use a rabbit hole analogy. You're either looking in it and it's very scary, and that's probably when you want to access resources, or you're in there and you're hanging on, still not too late, but it's going to take a little longer to rebound, or you're in there so deep like Denis was, because I was, no, nobody needs to know, should know, driving to work, sitting in my car crying, saying, okay, this is the day that I'm going to go up there and I'm going to be Mr. KPMG Enterprise, right? It's not like that. You don't snap. You can't cure yourself out of cancer or out of learning how to walk because you've had a car accident. Why can you cure yourself out of a cognitive challenge when it gets very serious, right?
No, for sure. I definitely think that's an important part. Just because it's not visible on the outside doesn't mean that it's something that you can fix by yourself without any
Yeah.
resources.
The ski accident example is a good one, right? Gabrielle sees me in a cast. It's easy to get. But Gabrielle sees that I'm sad. I don't want to socialize anymore. It's hard to understand that, right? So, yeah.
No, for sure. I guess then on top of that, because I guess it's different from a university perspective than corporate, but when I see my friends having an off day, sometimes it's hard to reach out and actually figure out what is wrong. From an organization with thousands of employees, how can organizations ensure that employees are taking care of their mental health?
Talking about it. It comes down to culture. We're very focused in creating, and we have created a culture where people can bring their whole selves to work, regardless of what that is, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their skin color, right? Because all of these things interplay. But if you only rah during mental health week and then you never hear about this, is that really going to make Gabrielle feel like I can really ask for help in this organization? Versus Gabrielle is in her first big audit kickoff and the leader of the audit says, we know this is a tight deadline. We know we all have lives. We all know we have, different commitments. How are we going to do this together? And by the way, if you need help, ask, right? So it's the little actions that make the huge difference in this space. And it's got to be tone at the top. Like from experience, I find it's very difficult if it doesn't start like from ourselves, right? Like I can send you to all kinds of training and populate your mental health toolbox. But one challenge I normally give, and I'll give this out to our listeners, is that if you needed help, like you, Gabrielle, not your friend Cindy or your friend Bill, if you needed help, would you be brave enough to ask for help to the right person? And if individually your answer is no, I want people to reflect on why. A young lady in Sweden that I helped a few weeks ago said, Denis, you made me realize that suffering in silence was easy, but asking for help was hard. But after I spoke to you, I approached my family doctor, and I'm on my way to recovery, right? So
Yes, it often takes courage to go out and ask for help. Even I find in lectures, sometimes it's intimidating to ask a prof a question in front of a lot of
yeah,
people, but once you do, a lot of people normally have the same question. And I think
yeah,
that is a
yeah,
good way for students to be able to relate, is that a lot of the time you're not alone, and that there are so many people who are willing to help you if you're brave enough to
no,
put your
you're
hand
right,
out for
Gabrielle.
help.
And you raise a good point in that some people don't get this. So I know some listeners are probably saying, you know what, I opened to my professor and they were horrible. Well, don't judge the whole planet by one experience. Find somebody else, right? Like if you were to approach me on the work front, my first question would not be, who's your performance manager? Who's your boss? My first question would be, who does Gabrielle have lunch with every day? Who does Gabrielle go to second cup with every day, right? Because circle of care, if let's say you've gone missing, you've gone quiet, and it was a friend approaching me, it's got to be the right person. So if you have approached a professor, you wanted to delay in something, don't